Hello and welcome to another edition of In the Trenches podcast. I'm your host, Seth Root. Unfortunately, my friend and co-host Cal Davenport could not be able to make it. But today we have a very special guest. His name is John Schweppe. He is the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for American Principles Project. In this role, he advances the organization's legislative priorities by working with allied groups and with federal and state lawmakers. He is also part of the alumni of the Claremont Institute Lincoln Fellowship and has been published in a number of public conservative publications, such as the New York Post, the American Mind, First Things, Newsweek, the Federalist, and the Daily Caller. John, glad to have you on our program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Seth. I appreciate it.
So I thought we start because the reason partly I wanted to have you on is to talk about the women's sports. You know, you guys, the American Principles Project, have been on the front lines trying to defend women's sports when it comes to the transgender issue. But I realized that maybe some of our listeners are unfamiliar with your guys' project, the American Principles. And so I was wondering if you can give us a little bit of what it's about, what its mission, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so we were founded in 2009 as a response to the Obama administration's overreach. And, we've been well known out here. We were one of the groups fighting the Common Core early on. We actually had a gold standard program. Like we had, a lot of these good programs and people knew APP. And then we started to realize there was a gap in terms of politics. So there's lots of social conservative groups putting out great white papers, talking about like how, what kinds of arguments to make and how to fight these guys. But no one was actually pouring money into campaigns and trying to help out the good guys and oust the bad guys. And so we kind of started with this back in 2016. I think that was our first race. Yeah, North Carolina with the HB2 fight. And McCrory actually was the governor then, and he's running for Senate now, which is interesting. But we got involved there. We spent a few $100,000. He ended up losing by like 10,000 votes. So we got our first taste of defeat. But we looked at our numbers and kind of our metrics and how we did this, and we saw that it was actually extremely effective. And so we wanted to take from that and keep, kind of learning from it and get better and better. We got involved in a Pennsylvania governor's race, which, again, we kind of did the APP thing. We really helped this guy who was good on our issues, opposing a guy who's bad on our issues, and got within a few points, but still lost. Then we got involved in the Kentucky governor's race in 2019 with Matt Bevin. You guys might remember the results there. We lost by 5,000 votes. And our internals showed us we moved almost 30,000 votes. So it was very frustrating again. But the important thing from all of these were, as we were kind of doing this, the 2016 race was about bathrooms. And that was an issue where I think, the majority of Americans agree with us, but it was only like a slight majority. I think the left had really good messaging in terms of how to oppose that. And then we're testing all these different issues to see like how can we oppose gender ideology in an effective way to where the vast majority of Americans agree with us. And so we poll tested, and then Kentucky came up in 2019, and we found that women's sports was an exceptional issue. And the reason is because most Americans believe in fairness, right? They want things to be fair. That's actually, I think, in some ways why we struggled a little bit on the bathroom issue, is because people didn't want to be unfair or mean to transgender people, right? But when it came to women's sports, it was pretty obvious. Like, I think once people understood the issue, okay, a biological male is just going to have insane advantages over your average female. And so that's why we're seeing, Leah Thomas at UPenn dominating and by laps in these swimming meets. And so we used those ads there. Again, we did lose that race technically, but what happened was everyone saw the ads and it went viral, and a lot of people liked what we did. We spent more money in that race than we had up to that point. And so people started talking about women's sports. So we actually had, I believe in 2020, Idaho was the first state to pass women's sports legislation protecting women's sports from gender ideology. Meanwhile, we got involved heavily in the 2020 race to the tune of $4 or $5 million. We got involved in the Georgia races. Obviously, we're running women's sports ads in addition to doing stuff on Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. And then last year, we saw this kind of rush to pass all these women's sports bills across the country to where now we have 9 states that have actually passed women's sports legislation, and we're expecting, about a dozen more to do it this cycle or this year. So it's really been fun watching this issue grow, and I do feel proud that I think APP in a lot of ways helped make that happen. But the way we did it was showing how it was helpful in politics and showing Republican politicians that they could talk about this issue and not feel vulnerable the way they had on LGBT issues in the past.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I actually was going to ask, because it feels like in the conservative movement for a long while, when it comes to these, I would say, pro-family issues, has been sort of this, ew, we should stay away from that. This is going to repel people. Kind of, we should stick to tax cuts or whatever. And because for I think for these people, they just think that this is going to divide people up, and so the better strategy would be to just focus on what we have been since the 1980s. So I guess one of my question was, how did you guys kind of change that, to where now we have, like you said, people are in a majority, I would say, especially women, who don't want who don't want biological males playing in women's sports. So can you tell us a little bit about that part?
Well, I think there's 2 things. So number one is fairness. And I think fairness in a lot of ways is an American value. Like, I think people really do believe that everything should be fair. One of the things we talk about on economics is, everyone should have the ability to have class mobility because that's fair, right? So it's not fair if poor people are consigned to being poor forever, or if they're, the thing on this that I think is really politically interesting, and I think Chris Rufo kind of understood this a lot on the CRT issue as well, is that when you start talking about our kids, people change a little bit. So we have kind of I would say almost a folk libertarian ethic in America of, hey, I might not like what you're doing, but just do whatever you want. Like, I'm not, as long as you're not hurting anybody, right? Like, you hear that over and over. It's probably more of a modern thing than, say, something the founders believed, but it is a reality. And so I think that's what the bathrooms issue was in a lot of ways. Like, people didn't buy the idea that it was hurting anyone. Obviously, there's incidents of predators and women being, we had the incident in Loudoun County recently with the rape. And so that type of thing, I think, kind of makes that a different issue. But so when it came to women's sports, when it comes to teaching kids that they're the wrong race, or that they're oppressors based on their race in school, those are the types of things where I think adults wake up and they start deciding, yeah, actually, no, that's not something we should be doing. That's unfair. That's wrong. And so I think one of the things I'm really urging folks to do, and I think actually it's kind of common sense now, I think people understand it, all of these fights are really about our kids. So, like, I don't care at all if you go to college and you learn something crazy. I'm not really interested in regulating what colleges do, because we're talking about kids over the age of 18. But it's insane to teach like critical race theory or gender ideology to kindergartners, right? And that should be obvious. So, but you mentioned the icky thing, which I think is a really good point, because a lot of Republican politicians have been afraid of this issue for a long time, even before Obergefell. You would have politicians avoiding gay marriage, for example, like the plague. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to say that there might be ramifications to Obergefell, which there obviously have been, like Bostock, for example. And I think one of the things we have to show Republicans, number one, is that this is not only a popular issue, but it's an issue people really do care about, kind of like the life issue, where I think people really do think gender ideology has gone too far. The speech codes, it's one thing, again, and I think the vast majority of Americans, probably 90%, if they ran into a transgender person on the street, they would treat them with the utmost respect. They would be very kind to them. They're not looking to be mean. But when it's about compelled speech, when it's about a compelled reality that isn't true, I think people kind of change their mind a little bit. So there's so much more work to do, Seth. Like, I mean, we have women's sports is a great issue, but that's hardly the only thing we should be focused on when it comes to the gender ideology stuff. I think the next step is icky, which is what I got banned from Twitter for, talking about how, we shouldn't be having these kids subjected to gender treatments and chemical castration when they can't even consent to sex. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to say castration. No one wants to talk about this stuff. I get it. But we have to look at it like child abuse and, all that stuff. And we do have to stand up on it. So.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see Asa Hutchinson, when that chemical castration thing, that bill came up, and he was like, well, this shouldn't be what the government should do. We should leave this to our doctors, to whatever. And this is the sort of thing I think I was talking about when I say, these issues for, I would say, conservative establishment consultants and stuff who go in and say, we shouldn't touch these issues. We should focus on these things. And on the one hand, I get it to a degree. But on the other, like you said, these are our kids. This is something worth fighting for, especially since they are our kids. But in this, like we're gonna go to Kristi Noem, because Kristi Noem at first was very much against, protecting women in women's sports. And the word was that these Chamber of Commerce group, I would say the big business kind of came in and kind of told her, no, this isn't what government should do, and that's my kind of worry, that these types of groups still have a stranglehold on the GOP, that they can't speak out about chemical castration or the protecting women in these sports. So what do you say about that, and that kind of relationship that has been going on for the past 20 years with the Chamber of Commerce and business in general, and how we're now seeing a clash, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I think this kind of gets at the problems of fusionism, right? Like, we understand that social conservatism is one of the three legs of the stool, but it's always kind of gotten the short leg, right? And so, and that naturally kind of makes sense if you think about it, because the politicians are funded by the wealthier business interests, and so obviously there's going to be more of an ear to that, and especially when social conservatism hasn't established what we're trying to do here at APP, an NRA for the family that puts the fear of God in these guys if they screw up. And so it is in many ways understandable from a just pure politics perspective why they have acted the way they have. That being said, I do think the pivot here has to be that we're really starting to, social conservatism is the central thing, that it's not something it's a deal breaker. Like, Asa Hutchinson's done in the GOP now. Like, he can take his Walmart, board seat after he's done with his term, but that's it. But I think the key thing for us in the realignment to really think about is, okay, well, we have two issues then. So number one is, where is the funding going to come from, right? Like, and I think that's what a lot of Republicans are wrestling with right now is, they get a lot of funding from corporations, small business owners, which I think is an obvious part of what our new coalition will be, small dollar donations from activists and people. But, that's scary, I think, in a lot of ways for them, is, can we really turn away from woke capital and corporations? Fortunately, I think January 6th actually helped accelerate that a little bit, because a lot of the corporations did that job for them. But I think the real tough thing here is developing a movement like what the pro-life movement has done. I'm sure the business interests hate the pro-life bills. There's no question, but no politician is going to say, yeah, well, I'm going to veto the 20-week bill. Like, it'll destroy them. And we have to get all these other issues, like critical race theory, like all the gender stuff, to that point. And so I think with Kristi Noem, what happened is exactly what you said. She had a lot of influence from, I think Pedro Gonzalez has written about this. Nate Hochman has written about this. There's Sanford Health. There's the Amazon plant that was coming in with a fulfillment center. There's all sorts of different stuff. And it did weigh on her. And so we were in a weird position going back to that, where she actually, at that point, I think 3 states had passed, or maybe only 2 had passed women's sports bills. She came out and said she wanted to be the third, and said she was going to sign the bill, and we were excited. She actually quote tweeted APP to say that she's going to sign the bill, and then all of a sudden she flip flopped, and so we were at a really important inflection point here for the prospect of getting these women's sports bills done elsewhere. And with her vetoing it, someone we wanted to champion the issue, we had to attack her. And what I think was really important is that it wasn't just APP attacking her. It was the entire conservative movement united, doing what I was just talking about, like being that organized movement to punish a politician for doing the wrong thing, even if it's not a money punishment. The way she would have a money punishment from the chamber or whoever if she went against them. And I think it was extremely effective. And so now, she did veto that bill. She got lambasted. But we saw Ron DeSantis sign a really strong women's sports bill in Florida. We got 9 states to do it. We have more coming. And so I really think that was just a key moment for us as a movement. And it kind of gives us a roadmap going forward. And I think we'd be able to do that on CRT. We'd be able to do that on a lot of these issues because people are done with squishes. And so, that's not tolerable anymore.
Yeah, I was going to ask, but I mean, you answered part of my question is how do we get conservatives to start? Because I do believe that there's still some resistance to some of these issues. CRT less so, because I think it's kind of natural for conservatives to be, for school choice and some of that stuff. It's part of the movement, been so for a while. But things like, this transgender issue, and talking about some of that stuff has been kind of like at arm's length to some degree. But it seems like trying to, in some ways, get a similar pro-life movement to get politicians to kind of push them in the right direction. However, I mean, I've been in politics for most of my life, and it's very hard to push a grassroots movement, So what has, American the Principles Project are going to do to try and get that there? Because it's very, like I said, it's very hard to get people up and out and get into politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think really, to be honest with you, a big part of it is power. So, I think the conservative movement's always been good at trying to persuade these guys of the right thing. And there's a lot of good politicians that we have in the Republican Party who will do the right thing to do the right thing, right? But there's plenty who aren't like just with the pro-life issue. There's lots of Republican politicians who are not pro-life. They just say they are. But it's okay that they do that as long as they recognize where the political power is and believe that if they don't act on the pro-life stuff, that people will turn against them. That's been a question with Donald Trump. It was one that I think a lot of folks asked on the campaign. Is he really pro-life? Like, he was pro-choice for a long time. He's a New York urbanite, right? Like, he's probably pro-choice. But he came out working with SBA List, working with some of these other groups, and committed to a pro-life agenda. And then during his 4 years, enacted it and was probably the most pro-life president we've ever had. Coming from a guy who's probably not pro-life, right? So I think that's where political power is everything. So, from our perspective, obviously we're still growing, we're still building, trying to build up Big Family, which is our PAC. But we're looking at engaging in primaries this cycle. We have, I think it's 24, no, it's not that many. It's like 22 Republicans in Congress who have signed on to Fairness for All, which is essentially the Equality Act, which is essentially a bill that would grant transgender rights, would end women's sports, would do all these things. It's insane, but it's out there. And we've looked at those members, and there's several of them in tough races, and we're looking to go in there and make this issue central to their defeat. And I think once you do that, once you show people that there's a political consequence, then they start to change their tune. Then, instead of saying, no, we're not going to do anything, they'll start using women's sports as like the bare minimum. They'll say, I'll give you a women's sports thing when we're looking for a lot more. And then you have to push further. So that's where we just lack that. And we have for a long time as a movement, probably because we're normal. Like we're normal people. We're focused on our families, our faith, like all that. Progressives are great at this because politics is their religion. Organizing is their religion.
Right.
And we do, frankly, I mean, it's just unfortunate. It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma. We have to do it too, or we will lose. And so I think that's just kind of where we got to build. And I'm hoping, it's not just APP. I think there's going to be other groups that do this too. But spending money, engaging in politics is key to all of this. It's more important than probably everything else we do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, to the conservative disposition is sort of like you said, they're so focused on their communities and all of that. They're very anti-political. And I always love what Harry Jaffa used to say was, if politics, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And that's sort of the attitude we need to start taking is, there's consequences to these policies that affect my kids, my family, my state, and so on. And it's one of those things where, I mean, I've been a conservative activist for a very long time, and it's very frustrating on some of these issues to try and get people engaged and get out there. But I mean, I know you already said that you're going to jump into these primaries in the 2022 midterms. Tell us a little bit more about your guys' plans, what you guys hope to achieve for the midterms here, and
Sure.
specifically what you hope when it comes to the women's issues and such like that.
So I won't give away numbers because my communications director would get really mad at me, and we haven't raised the money yet. But we are looking at, so we have the primary plan, that's a part of it. But we are looking at really engaging to help Republicans take back the House and Senate. So 2 to 3 Senate races, hopefully pick up opportunities. States like Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, possibly, depending on the candidate. The House, obviously, we want to make sure we get involved in some of these majority maker districts where it puts, the Republicans over the top. As your listeners might have noticed, I don't think we're winning the gerrymandering the way I think we had hoped to. And it's really frustrating to see my home state, Illinois, just go insane with the Democrat gerrymander. And that's fair. But every Republican gerrymander has to, be changed by the courts. Very annoying. So we can't just take the House for granted. I think we're going to win it, but we can't take it for granted. And then there's also some governor's races. And I think, one of the interesting things we'll have is that, we're going to see women's sports legislation passed in a lot of these states. You might have a Democrat governor that vetoes it. Hey, look, there's an issue. There's an ad that we can really run on. So, and then, in terms of the issues, I mean, we do always have to be nimble and adapt. Sometimes things change. So we ran in 2020 Black Lives Matter ads talking about the extremeness of that movement, defund the police, all these things. And that was kind of a last minute thing because it came up in the summer of 2020. And those ads were the most effective ads we ran. But, I think women's sports is going to be a big part of it. I think we will address the ongoing effort to push kids into sterilization and sex changes. You have to handle that issue with care and do it in the right way, but it is an important issue. And then I think critical race theory. I think, that's the issue that in many ways, I think won Virginia for Youngkin. And so that's got to be the template going forward. Not just school choice, as I think some of my libertarian friends might take as a lesson from that, but fixing our own schools, right? Like making sure that the curriculum in the schools we're in currently is not anti-American and and racialist in its nature. So, but yeah, so I'm really excited. I'm hoping, honestly, we're kind of hoping for an 8-figure spend, which would be pretty incredible. It'd be our highest by far. And, hopefully it shows that the power of these issues to where candidates will run ads on these issues too, where it won't just be, an IE from an outside group targeting people, but it'll actually be a key part of the campaign. And something I didn't mention that I probably should, and I don't think we'll be running ads on it, but it could come up, is abortion. We are about to see Dobbs happen, and Roe could be overturned. And I don't think people are ready for what that means, because as soon as that happens, abortion politics is going to be turned up to 11. You're going to have Democrats passing 40-week bills in all of their blue states. You're going to have Republicans, squishy Republicans, not sure if they really want to ban abortion or not. So, and that's going to happen probably in May or June. So this is going to be a pretty crazy cycle. And if Republicans steer into it and really act conservative and chart a positive conservative vision for the good, I think they're going to win big. But if they don't, if they think that they could just be not the Democrats, there's a big risk in that. I don't think that the American people are necessarily thrilled with the Republicans right now either. They're just really annoyed with Biden for good reason.
And in certain states, I'm in Oregon, so the what's going on in Portland, the devastation of all the riots and stuff. I think that also has caused a lot of discomfort with where the Democrat Party is right now. But I do have a question for you, since you hit on abortion, and as you said, Dobbs is coming up. Because I'm a big anti-abortionist, but I am unsure of where the court is going to go. So what do you make of the court, and where do you think it's going to go, and do you think it's going to bode well for us?
So I'm not an expert, and so I definitely defer a lot to folks, and I've asked a lot of folks for their opinion on this that I respect. I will tell you, I listened to the arguments, and it seemed pretty darn good for us. Obviously, John Roberts is really trying to chart a middle ground where he doesn't upend Roe, and I just don't think either side was willing to go with him on that. And so that kind of presents an interesting situation. But I think we have to prepare for the fact that it could be overturned. And if that happens, I think 15-week bills become the bare minimum, right? Like I think that becomes, okay, every Republican running for office has to support that. And then really, I think where the movement will be pushing is we got to get these heartbeat bills passed. We have to mimic the Texas abortion law and try to do that. And so it's, look, it's funny because APP doesn't work closely on this issue. There's so many other groups that do a great job at that. We work closely with SBA List. So, obviously they are the premier pro-life organization in the country. But I think it's going to be probably one of the most important issues of the election. I think that Republicans are going to have to be bold, and they can't go out there and say, we'll see, or they can't, and they also can't just defer to the court anymore and say, well, it's the law of the land. No, actually, if Roe's overturned, the law of the land will be what you make of it.
Right.
And so what do you want to see? And so that's kind of what I've heard, and I think is probably accurate. Is the 15-week bill. You saw Ron DeSantis has committed to that, really wants to see that passed in Florida, which Florida actually has some of the worst abortion laws in the country. So that's really encouraging and really important down there. But we gotta start passing those bills and then move the ball and win the argument in the public square, because I think we obviously won it on late term abortion, but there is still a lot of work to do after 6 weeks. So
yeah, I agree with that. I really, really hope. I mean, I don't know anybody in Washington, D.C. who is, on this issue. So that's why I asked. But a part of me is, I mean, I would take the David French's type of view, which is pretty much we have Roe overturned, and then the states can do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And this is something that because of Josh Craddock and what he has done, has really pushed for this 14th Amendment of trying to get, that states can't, because of the 14th Amendment, give abortion on demand. But I feel like, and this is why I asked you, that this issue has I can see it becoming more of the, we just, California can have its own thing, and Oregon can have its own thing, and Texas can have whatever it wants. And I worry that that's just going to be the the end result of that.
So
You know?
the nice thing about handing this back to the people is that it doesn't have to be a fixed thing the way it kind of was when we handed it to 9 elites that don't represent the country. And so, I think that it is going to be a constant battle, but that's what democracy is. It's messy, and that's a good thing. Obviously, I love what Craddock wrote. I loved what Finnis wrote. I think the 14th Amendment approach is a good one long term. I would want any Republican I vote for president to be endorsing that as a possible route. But, I think that there is an incrementalism to it. And I don't think we can just go 0 to 60 on that right away. I just practically, I would love to.
Yes.
I know some of us Red Caesar folks would love to, but that's probably just not how it's going to go. So I think you have to prepare for the reality, which is that we will get these 15-week bills passed probably this year. I imagine this will be a priority in a lot of states. And then, we got to move the envelope and start arguing. Something that's interesting, and again, I'm not an expert on pro-life messaging, but for a long time, we've focused on taxpayer funding for abortion. We've focused on late-term abortion, when babies feel pain, that sort of thing. And I think those are all great arguments. Obviously, they're like 70-30, 75-25 issues. But now, especially if we're arguing for heartbeat bills, we really are going to be arguing about saving babies' lives, right? That's just purely what it's going to be about. So, when you have Texas's heartbeat bill, if someone goes to Abbott and says, you need to repeal this bill, his response should actually be, that would kill thousands of babies. I'm not going to do that. Right. And I don't know if we're ready. Obviously, pro-life activists have been talking like that for a long time. Politicians haven't really. And so I think that's going to be kind of the adapting to a new comfort zone, and Republicans are going to have to do it. And so we'll see if they do.
That's funny you say that, because when you started to talk about that, it was like, well, the Texas heartbeat law really, really changed things, because now I'm seeing so many people, at least on Twitter, talk about how this law have saved lives. And it's changed that totally from what it was, which is really, the sort of thing where, is this really a baby? Is it not? Or, but because of this bill, it's sort of like it really has changed from, is it saving lives, and is it, or is it not? And it's really done a good job on that. Of course, I don't know what the court is going to say and such when it goes back up to the Supreme Court, but it's very interesting to see that. I think now has been the best for the past couple of years. This pro-life, pro-family movement has really gotten the people's attention, and they're responding the right way, and now we're seeing some Republicans at least not being afraid to now go and support these kind of issues, and kind of even rebuff maybe some of the Chamber of Commerce like groups who want to stay with the status quo. And you guys have been a great part of that. So
and Trump was a big part of that.
And Trump.
I think that's ultimately what it kind of comes to. We were a much more unified's the wrong word, but like not heterodox party, where we had to commit to what is conservatism and doing this and this the right way, and appealing to our experts to kind of determine like what our strategies would be. I remember being on a 2012 congressional campaign where we polled the 20-week bill and found that our Democrat opponent was, this was actually a 2014 campaign. Our Democrat opponent was extremely weak on this, extremely weak. And we were told by the NRCC, no, don't do it. You can't do it. Which is nuts, right? And things moved when, I think Rand Paul was one of the first to bring it up in the debates and talked about a 7-pound baby, which was totally off the wall messaging, different than what, the Republican establishment had deemed how you're supposed to talk about this issue. And then you had Donald Trump in that third debate, which I think probably won him the election in 2016, where he was talking about how horrific the idea of a third term abortion is. And, Hillary Clinton has nothing to say to that, because that's what they support. So, I think in a lot of ways, Trump moved the ability of us to have these debates internally and allowed us to kind of push right, I think, in many ways. And again, this is where having power continue to shift towards the new right, or towards, if you don't want to call groups like Heritage the new right, but towards groups that are coming towards us. I think that's a good thing, and I think it'll help to move the ball going forward.
I'll end it there because that was a great, good note to end it on. But John, thank you so much for coming on the program. I really appreciate it, and keep doing the good fight.
Sounds good, Seth. Thanks for having me.